want to begin with an opening contemplation. So welcome everyone. For me, one of the ways we know what we know, one method of inquiry, is time in nature and sensing energy. And this is a song that I wrote. It's part of a song. I'm not going to do the whole song, but I wanted to do just an opening contemplation to get us in touch with nature and Mother Earth. The earth is your mother, let her heal you. Everything is energy, the earth and me and you. Feel the resonance, nature's eloquence. The earth is your mother, let her heal you. The earth is your mother, let her heal you. Bare feet upon the ground, you will surely thrive. Lean your back against a tree, like you, it's so alive. Notice where there's pain, let it flow away. The earth is your mother, let her heal you. The earth is your mother, let her heal you. I am just thrilled with being able to introduce the members of this panel and to give you all a heads up, as Paul did just a little while ago, that this is going to be a very rapid moving and not highly participative session. I think of this as a speed dating session where the goal is to have the emerging scholars and senior scholars, everyone who's in attendance, just get a real sense of the breadth of different kinds of ways of knowing and scholarly inquiry that have been around a long time that we may not know so much about, and that are emerging and brand new that we might not know so much about, and to just expand our sense of the palette of colors we could paint with, to use another metaphor. So each of our panelists is going to have only 7 minutes to do a quick overview of their particular way of a particular method that they're going to share, or perspective. And then we'll move right on to the next one. And then if there's time, we'll have questions and answers at the end. I will give the panelists a 1-minute warning. I'll try to do that as gently and gracefully as I can, so that you can wrap up your thought and then move on. That the panelists are Ion Mitroff, who's going to be talking about modes of inquiry, and Joan Marks, who's talking about phenomenology as a qualitative inquiry option. Ornita Burton is talking about demystifying the spirit in spirituality. Jyoti Bakani is bringing in the arts to humanize management and experiential methods of inquiry. Julia Storberg-Walker is sharing about collaborative autoethnography, and Sandra Waddick is introducing us to definitively normative, which I don't know what that means yet, so I'm excited to hear about all of these, actually. Each of these people are leaders in the field. They have done much more in-depth presentations on these methods and approaches, and we hope that they will do much more for us in the field as they have already done. So I'm going to turn it right over to Ayan Mitroff. Ayan, welcome and take it away. And I will stop sharing. Oops, I thought. There we go.
All
Okay.
right. Thanks, Judy. Let me give a brief overview. I'm going to pick a particular form of inquiry, but to do that, I have to introduce a particular kind of problem. I'm going to talk about the epitome of unbounded, unstructured problems, because a lot of research is concerned inquiry with bounded structure. A lot of the methodology has been developed for that. To that, I want to turn to one of the most eminent social systems thinker, Russ Ackoff, who appropriated the word mess to stand for whole system problems that were so interconnected, such that you couldn't take any problem out of the mess and study it independently without doing irreparable damage both to the problem and to the entire mess. The second thing I want to talk about is the idea of a wicked problem. A wicked problem is a problem for which none of the known academic disciplines or professions have the final say in its definition or resolution. The point is that the problems of the world we're now facing are wicked messes. You could pick any innumerable one: COVID, homelessness, and the like. You only cope with wicked messes. And that is a fruitful topic of inquiry, mainly looking at heuristics and how we cope. One of the ways of coping, because one of the key properties of a mess are all the interactions between the so-called separate problem, means assembling a group of experts on each of the so-called problems, along with an organizational therapist, a systems therapist, and having a conversation, a story, to explore the interactions between the separate problems, because it's the interactions that are key in today's world. So none of the problems that we're facing are separate and distinct from all the other problems that make up a mess. Now, unfortunately, none of the academic disciplines, you'll have to look hard in the curricula of most schools to find where they talk about messes, because we're still organized around separate disciplines and professions. And that is really our undoing. The failure to think systemically is one of the biggest problems facing us in our civilization. Look at COVID. COVID is not just a public health problem, which it is, of course, but consider this, that over the years, epidemiologists have done simulations on the spread of disease. No one simulated, as far as I knew, all the phony arguments that people would concoct for not getting vaccinations and hence help spread the disease. Because we don't put together people in linguistics and social science, along with public health people, as much as we should, to really look at the interactions between problems. Let me stop there. That's a brief overview, but let me say this. The notion of wicked problems is, I regard, is one of the most essential contributions of the philosophical school of pragmatism. Pragmatism's definition of truth: truth is that which makes a social, a spiritual, and ethical difference in the quality of our lives. So pragmatism is highly interactive. It doesn't look at separateness, and the lack of separateness is the key of wicked problems. So we have to expand our thinking and our being if we're going to have any hope of making any progress whatsoever, whatever progress means in coping with complex, difficult problems, which are wicked messes. Now I will stop.
Thank you so much, Ian. You packed so much into that few minutes, and I know there's a lot more that we can learn, particularly about facing wicked problems. All right, we're going to turn it over next. Oops, I lost to Joan. Joan Marks, please. Thank you. And I see Paul's got the schedule, so thank you, Paul. Good partner.
Thank you so much, Judy, for this opportunity. I am very passionate about phenomenology, and even though it's not an emerging inquiry option, it is one that I consider very soothing and very well useful, very useful in the stream of research that we implement here. I'm not sure if I will be able to share this. Am I sharing?
Yes,
Yes,
thank you. That's great.
But am I sharing the right thing, which is the presentation?
We
Yes?
see
Okay.
the sidebar. If
You see the phenomenology as an inquiry, as a qualitative inquiry option?
yes, and
Okay.
yeah, that's fine.
Okay, then that's what we will be doing. So I will quickly go over what I feel very passionate about in my studies. I did 2 doctorates, one on workplace spirituality as a phenomenon, and the other one on Buddhist psychology. And what I found is that phenomenology is superb as a qualitative inquiry method. I know that quantitative is still considered very highly, you know, mostly used, but the qualitative methodology goes in depth. So when I talk about quantitative, when I think about quantitative, I think about finding out the what of things. And when we're talking about qualitative, we're talking about the why and the how. Now, Creswell, one of the sources that I very frequently cite, says that a phenomenological study describes the meaning of lived experiences for several individuals about a concept or a phenomenon. And what you do with this is you identify 3 to 10, sometimes more. My friends at Tinder used 16, and that makes it a little more difficult. I want to warn you, really, the more people you interview in a phenomenological study, the harder the horizontalization process becomes. But what you engage in, what I like most about phenomenology is that you are the researcher and also the research instrument. That makes phenomenological inquiry, in my opinion, so attractive, so appealing, because you determine the speed of how you will engage your study and how fast it will go and how deep you will go. Now, the first thing you do is you engage in purposive sampling. What is that? It means that you, as the research instrument, will identify what the criteria are of the people that you will interview and who will match that. Now, purposive sampling very often goes hand in hand with snowball sampling, because if you want to interview 6 or 8 people, you may not know all of these people. You may know 1 or 2, but what they will do, they can refer you to others. And that is the snowball sampling process. One person refers you to others who meet the same criteria. Of course, you'll also need a research question, and you'll have to engage in data collection. One of the recommendations is that you engage in semi-structured one-on-one interviews. I found from my study efforts that it's better to have a structured interview process, so that you have an interview protocol, and that will help you with the horizontalization process. So this is what basically my study format always looks like when I engage in a phenomenological research. You formulate your research questions, you develop your interview protocol, you let it be validated by 2 icons in the field. When I did my first study, I had Ian Mitrov and Judy Neal to validate my interview protocol. Now, those are resounding names in the field. So if you have those people to validate your protocol, actually there's nobody who can question the validity of that particular instrument. Once you've done that, it's recommended that you engage in a pilot study, so that you can find out if people understand the questions that you ask. And then you can also find out if those questions, those answers will help you in answering your research question. That's a confirmation of your content validity of your instrument. And then you can go ahead and interview your study subjects. Anywhere between 6 to 8, I think I'm very comfortable with. You then transcribe the interviews if you have all of them. And here's another piece of validity, because you really want to make sure, especially in qualitative inquiry, that you have a lot of validating points. You send out your interviews back to the people that you interviewed and ask them to verify that what you wrote there is what they said. That is what we call member checks. Once you have that back from them, Then you can go ahead and analyze the interviews. You prepare a horizontalization table. That's a table where you put all the answers from interviewee 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on one line. And then you go ahead and you start reading. This is what I like about phenomenology. You don't necessarily need software. You do have software for it, but you don't necessarily need that if you really want to engage in an intense reading process. And as you do that, you will find out that the redundancies in the answers can be taken out. And before you realize it, you are engaging in phenomenological reduction. And you will see themes emerging. And then you can engage in, once you have the themes, in structural and textural description. The textural description is when you verbatim cite what people are saying, and the structural description is when you basically write your own language. This is what my study looked like. I had an extensive complexity because one of my examiners wanted inter-rater reliability. I have to say that was never applied in a qualitative study. So after doing my dissertation in 2004, I wrote a paper about it, which now has about 400 citations. So it seems as if a lot of people are struggling with the same thing. But again, the more validation you can get, the better. So it really validated my study immensely. And as a final note, I would like to say these are some of the terms that I already explained: member checks, validating, you know, your study through sending the material back to them. Epoch is basically, or epoch is just bracketing your knowledge, because as the instrument in your own research, you have preconceived notions. You want to put them aside, and that is the bracketing process. We can talk more if interested, and I want to keep it to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joan. Thank you. I know that about 10 years ago, we actually asked you to do a presentation on phenomenology for MSR, and that wasn't recorded, but it was an hour long. And how fabulous to be able to hit the highlights. And I hope you'll share your slides with Paul so that we can have them available to participants. It's just a very, very powerful method of research. Thank you. Next is Arnita Burton, and Arnita will be following this session. Hi, Arnita.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Good to see you.
Good.
So Arnita's doing the session right after this with the Promising Dissertation Award recipients. So stay on right after this. Arnita, you'll be talking about demystifying the spirit and spirituality. It's all over to you.
Great. Thank you, Judy. I appreciate that. And I especially appreciate being able to follow Joan Mark, because that's exactly the case, and the point that I want to make is that sense of when we understand the spirit aspect, not spirituality. Okay, spirituality has to do with the human element that is surrounding and grounded in human nature, which is fine. But when we study spirit, and I'm saying is that identifying it as more of a capital S rather than a lowercase s, different approaches need to occur. I'm going to share my screen for just a minute and go to this so that I can move quickly. I just put a few points in the slides just to be able to, let me see if I can actually do this better. Okay, so that I can make this brief. The challenge is that there's a mystical aspect that's always presented when it comes to defining the spirit. And I truly believe, just like anything else, is that some topics we don't do the justice in terms of research because we don't use the right method, the right approach. Qualitative studies, absolutely. Phenomenology, absolutely. The problem is that we don't take the topic in a, let's say, as a true opportunity to study it as we would other topics, qualitatively and quantitatively. And so I want to make a case for the idea of, just like yesterday when Bill talked about the idea of a shared sacred story. You know, we as a community of people who believe that there is something more than ourselves have a shared story. And if we could understand it ourselves, I do believe that we can make a distinct difference in terms of the quality of life of ourselves and other people. And so what I looked at and what I realized in terms of just looking at what the concern is that much of our spirit aspect has to do with spirituality. And so when you look at research, we see spirituality in terms of like human kindness, enlightenment, connectedness, joy. There's so many different terms. And so I actually went back, and again, I do value and respect Ian, because when I did my dissertation, I looked at a lot of his work, and this was in disease surveillance. It wasn't in spirituality. But if you look at the original definitions, and I do mention Ian and his co-researcher Denton in that, is that there is that element of finding meaning, okay, connections between others. Also, I give another example in terms of Ashma and Dushan, is that sense of when we look at spirituality, we're dealing with still people. Whereas when we move over and talk about the spirit, often it is equated with religion, just like at one time spirituality was. It's also made mystical. It's defined as something that cannot be verified, closed knowledge, not open to challenge, evidence attributed to human action. And so, you know, we miss it. I think we absolutely miss it, because just like in this example, someone, Dixon, I believe, made a comparison between science and religion. And those are two totally different relationships, because science is natural design. Religion is a man-made construct for the most part, okay, whereas spirituality is not. And so that sense of where, if we truly study, okay, the spirit, okay, as we would deal with science or anything else that's credible, we would come up with a different understanding that can be shared in a professional way. Compare that to the idea of race. Race is a social construct, okay, that is not even accepted by biologists and anthropologists, okay, but it's very dominant in terms of how we live as a society, okay. The nature of the spirit can be researched and should be, as it exists in reality. There is a difference between spirit as a capital S, okay, and spirit, the spirit of man, which the absolutes is that spirit has a sense of the perfection, if I can use that word, okay, probably a better word, but that sense of the ideal state of things like love and joy, okay, but it's ideal. When we associate anything, spirituality, with people, we're flawed. And so we have to make a distinction between an element of what it means to be spiritual in a good sense and spiritual in a dark sense. With that, if we have a deeper appreciation and a recognition of the spirit, okay, we can hopefully fill a lot of the gaps in understanding and the limitations, okay, of just being human compared to that which has no limit. Thank you so very much. I appreciate the opportunity, Judy.
Thank you, Arnita, and thank you for highlighting this central aspect of doing research. As you were talking, I was thinking about a book title. I haven't read this book, but the book title is With God as My Co-Pilot. And it got me to imagining doing research with God or spirit or Buddha mind or whatever concept you use for that which is greater than ourselves. How we do research with spirit coming through us, and the spiritual practices and the spiritual guidelines and wisdom we use I don't think there's ever been a study like of doctoral students and how they incorporate spirituality in their research. That would be a fascinating topic. I do know that that in MSR we really want to encourage people not only to study the topic but to live it and be it. And you've inspired us to think about that more.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, next up is Jyoti Bakani, who has done so many wonderful, Jyoti, welcome. So many wonderful presentations that are stretching the boundaries of how we know what we know at MSR and AOM, that bring in creativity and arts. And so you'll be talking about arts to humanize management and experiential methods of inquiry. We're looking forward to hearing what you want to share and how you share it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for opening with that lovely song that brings the arts into the room and sets me in my happy space. And thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm going to speak about the arts and experiential methodologies. We go through life with this body as our instrument, and having clean instruments and clear, precise instruments is the best way to do research. So instead of treating the body as something that we use just to carry our brains around, because brains are what we get rewarded for in our profession especially, it is a way to reclaim the spirit through acknowledging the embodiment of our entirety of experience. So I'm going to do 3 things in this short introduction to what I do. I'm going to ask you to rub your ears. Give your ears a nice massage. You've been listening to the presenters. Put your thumb behind and above, pull them, move them around. And with that little exercise, you just connected your left and right brains. The next thing I want you to do is take the first 2 fingers and tap just under your eyes, and you'll feel the energy moving. And if it is tender, you need to do it more. And then you can do it on your collarbone, and you'll feel the energy moving. And as I go through the rest of the presentation, feel free to do these exercises. So that's the experiential part of bringing our whole self. I'm going to play you a short video clip of my work using the arts.
Be professional. Usually that means do not bring emotions or personal life to work. What if we were to show up as fully human at work? A few years ago, I heard the CEO of a global pharma company chant a long Sanskrit prayer to a packed audience of American management professors. I wondered what Sanskrit chanting had to do with mindful business. He told a personal tale about how his spiritual practice guided him through some tough business decisions, and how he came to be so public about what he had previously guarded as his private practice. I turned to the arts for reconnecting with my spirit: poetry, improv, music, paintings, etc. What if I brought these to my professional life? Fast forward 4 years, and I have offered several contemplative and experiential art workshops at professional conferences with and for business professors and students, encouraged by the feedback and success. I was surprised when my first proposal for an experiential improv workshop passed the competitive peer review process. The attendees were surprised that instead of the usual presentation on how to use improv, they were guided to play together. We all were surprised, pleasantly, at the way many untold stories spilled out in our play with a lot of emotion, connecting us as community, even though we had started the hour as a room full of strangers. In the closing circle, one professor said, "Laughter has no accent." Another, a distinguished professor whose work I had admired since I was a student, said, "You're so brave to offer this. I wrote academic articles about improv, but practicing it is the best way to demonstrate its power." This work has taken on a life of its own. I met colleagues who did inspiring work before me to pave the way for me to do this, and others who are inspired by my work. Nancy lived a dual life as a management professor and an artist, hiding one side from the other. Steve nurtured a community that supported the use of arts in management. Vasanthi was inspired by our contemplative arts salon to return to her love of dance and create a training program for 500 women leaders for a large pharma company using a dance concert. The time seems right for bringing our humanity to all that we do. Being human is being a good professional. Let the arts connect and
Thank you. And so the experiential part was the first thing. Talking about my work through the video was the second. And the final thing I want to leave you with is a couple of poems. And these are poems written by Professor Jim March. He needs no introduction, but because I don't have the poems memorized, I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint to read them from.
And we have 1 minute.
Yes, and this will take exactly that much.
Thank you.
So most of you know Jim March through his work as the most influential organizational scholar we have, or we had rather, but he kept writing poems all through his life. And nobody knew about that other than his close friends. I happened to be lucky enough to have discovered it through my work with poetry and have picked these from his books. What does he have to say about sampling plans? Our lives are filled with many more stories that could be told than there are occasions for remembering or listeners. The main difference among the histories we record come not from the events of a life, but from the choices we make in recounting them. So thank you for being good listeners and allowing me to recount the stories that haven't been told. These are the 11 books of poetry by Jim March, which most of the people at the Academy have never heard of. 30 of those have been published in a commemorative issue for him in January this year in Journal of Management History, where you can find more. And I'll close with what he had to say about scholarship in his private writing in the poems. For most of the things we do that anyone notices, that noticing comes a long time after the doing. We plant our seeds in many gardens for many years before the first one germinates, if it ever does. Glad to have brought Jim March's poems to you, and the timing being right for bringing the arts and the unspoken silences and contemplative traditions. Thank you for participating, and thank you for the invitation and the time.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you so much. And I would encourage everyone to friend Jyoti on Facebook, because she shares all kinds of wonderful, inspiring art and thoughts and poetry there. And it's a beautiful way to keep up with your work and your thinking and your being. Thank you. So our next presenter is Julia Storberg-Walker, who will be talking about collaborative autoethnography. Julia, welcome. We're so glad you're here. And I know you've shared a lot with the Fetzer scholars about collaborative autoethnography. And we look forward to, since we have several new Fetzer scholars with us today, we look forward to you sharing these ideas with them.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I'm not there with you in person, but I'm really grateful I can share this with you via recording. So I'm going to tell a little story today about the emergence of qualitative inquiry and how collaborative autoethnography is a really radical and transformative potential for this form of inquiry. Early qualitative research allowed the emergence of multiple voices, which before had not been heard. And things like messy texts and dialogue and empowerment. But early qualitative research really was stuck in a humanist perspective, grounded in humanist concepts of language, reality, power, knowledge, and truth. And in this space, qualitative research became centered, disciplined, regulated, and normalized in qualitative handbooks. You could teach someone how to do phenomenology, and you could know the method in advance, right? Just like a quantitative study. After a while, there was a resistance that built up to this kind of codification and commodification of qualitative inquiry, and qualitative inquiry began to be influenced by postmodern theories and opened up concepts like validity, voice, empathy, authenticity, experiencing, interviewing, the field. And you can see how postmodernism kind of then, threw off some of the shackles of that normalizing of the inquiry. Today it's gone even farther, I would say, and deeper. Qualitative research might be thought of as becoming in a Deleuzian sense. Researchers imagine and accomplish inquiry by producing different knowledges and producing knowledge differently. Producing different knowledges and doing inquiry differently. It can't be easily described in handbooks or textbooks. It's not instrumental. It's from within you. In this methodology to come, we begin to do it differently wherever we are in our projects. Here, the term post-qualitative begins to make a certain sense, St. Pierre. It is in this space that collaborative autoethnography is flourishing. CAE has its roots in ethnography and autoethnography, and it's important to understand a little bit about these roots. Ethnography is both a methodological approach to and an analytic perspective on social research. It occupies a borderland between the social sciences and the humanities, and Van Manen calls ethnography fieldwork, headwork, and text work. It's interesting to me that heart work and spiritual work were not words that he used. A good deal of the cognitive work involved in ethnography is in developing concepts, theories, and frameworks. Moving to autoethnography. Autoethnography is an approach to research and writing that describes and analyzes personal experience in order to understand a cultural experience. Autoethnography sees research as a political, socially just, and socially constructed act. A researcher uses tenets of autobiography and ethnography to do and write autoethnography. Consequently, it's both a process and a product. Autoethnography is often described as a personal experience narrative of the author-researcher, which extends sociological understanding. Boji and Tyler say the value of autoethnographic inquiry is in exploring multiple layers of consciousness and multiple selves. And Ricci says that autoethnography is as much about discovery as it is about telling something in a narrative order. Autoethnographic researchers situate themselves in context, social and historical and cultural, and take a stance against objectivity and silent authorship. This genre has many possible branches, including personal narratives, ethnographic memoir, narrative inquiry, emotionalism, ethnographic short story. Collaborative autoethnography has been described as a research method in which two or more researchers pool their autobiographical narrative materials related to an agreed upon topic or social phenomenon and analyze and interpret the meanings of their personal experiences within their socio-cultural context. Chain, Longman, and Franco. By allowing researchers to explore the self in the presence of others, CAE enables scholars to gain a collective understanding of their shared experiences. Nukunjiri, Hernandez, and Chang. I use CAE methods, practices, and ways of being as an educator because I understand relationality, reciprocity, responsibility, and interdependence is reality. In philosophy, ontology is the study of what is, and a relational ontology suggests that what is always and forever in the making through relations. In this way of understanding the world, the essence of a person or object is not found within the thing itself. Instead, the essence of a person or object is co-emergent with other persons and objects within a web of relations. Consequently, CAE offers a profound learning, becoming, relating, and healing space. In that space, we seek to understand and experience individual learning and transformation, generating collective learning and transformation with, about, and from each other. The inquiry allows access to learners' private worlds and can provide rich data of lived experiences from diverse social and cultural perspectives. CAE offers a container, a space, to become whole in community. There's a great need for these spaces and a great transformative potential in the practice. In addition, CAE aligns with emerging evidence from quantum research, neuroscience, and original wisdom from centuries past. In conclusion, I hope this short presentation has offered you some history of qualitative research, the roots of CAE, and a description of what I see as the transformative potential of this form of inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia, and thank you for all the work you have done to help bring collaborative autoethnography to just about any group you work with, because you've seen it used as a tool that not only builds wisdom, it builds what you love to talk about in terms of ontological relationship, relational ontology. Thank you. So now we turn to Sandra Waddick. And Sandra, welcome. And I remember working with Sandra. You invited me before I knew you to be on a panel of radicals, rebels, and rogues, or something like that. And you have always been on the edge as an intellectual shaman in work, and you're always helping us to push the field forward in not only the topics, but the way that we understand. So we look forward to you sharing about definitively normative.
Thanks, Judy, and thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to be here. I'm going to use the framework of intellectual shamans. There are two of the shamans are with us. Both Judy and Ian were featured in the book. So I love Ian's perspective on systemic problems, and I'm not going to work with PowerPoints. I'm just going to speak. So I'm going to take off from his remarks about the messes or massively systemic problems that we're facing, and that I believe we need to be tackling collectively. That kind of problem doesn't lend itself, as Ian noted, to positivist scholarship, and we can't do it without, one, acknowledging the values that inform our research, and two, operating in the context of what Ian calls messes or complex wickedness, in what Chris Laszlo yesterday talked about as a prospective way. In other words, we're looking to the future. We can't necessarily rely on what happened in the past to get us there. So in that context, it's necessary to be following your intuition, in a sense, and making connections as a core aspect of doing that research. And that's fundamentally a spiritual practice, even though most people would not acknowledge it as such. It's here what I call definitively normal. Values are involved, and you can't get away from them. So what do intellectual shamans do? The shamanic approach involves three different elements: healing, connecting, and sense-making. These are the three tasks of the shaman. And it's a definitively normative or values-inclusive way of approaching our work as intellectuals and as scholars. And so recently I was told that the ideas around system change that a group I'm associated with has been developing, that I've been developing in particular, are quote-unquote ahead of practice. That's what Chris Laszlo calls prospective theorizing. He discussed that in depth yesterday. To my mind, it's about building new social imaginaries that have the potential to shape a desired future because they're based on a set of foundational values that many people can agree to, and that provide a set of aspirations that we can align along. For me, those values include social justice, equity, and ecological flourishing of all beings on what David Abrams calls other than humans as well as human beings. And this is all related to me to the three things that shamans do. The healing part is about defining your agenda, your research agenda. What is it you hope to accomplish with your research and publications? And clearly the idea of healing itself is normative because we see something broken and we want it to change. No one wants to make the world worse, obviously. That means understanding in some way what needs to heal and thinking through about how it might be healed. And it could be whatever context is the one that appeals to you. It is about the creation of what I lately call new social imaginaries. So as Ian noted, we live in a fraught world filled with intersecting, indeterminate problems that are constantly dynamic. So that's really hard to deal with. But that's the healing task we have, is to understand and try to make that world better. I say that's definitively normative because we can't get away from values or pretend that they don't exist in that context. The questions that we choose, think about the poem that Jyoti read from Jim March. The questions that we choose are normative. The focus that we develop is a normative choice. How we gather, analyze our context and our data, i.e. the collaborative ethnography approach that Julia just talked about, those are normative choices. And the conclusions we reach because we've analyzed the data have normative impact as well. We might as well acknowledge that. So that's the healing piece here. The connecting function. And so much of my research, for me, writing is about connecting. Somehow when I'm writing, I go somewhere. My shamanic group tells me, you go somewhere. I don't know where I go, but things click. And when they click, that's an inspiration or insight. It's the idea that relates directly to what Claire LaChance from ION spoke about this morning, that sort of sudden flash of insight. Connecting is, in my view, what we do as intellectual shamans, working around these issues of healings. You could say that this connecting process could involve other people, but for me it takes place when I see things in a new way. It involves connecting ideas. So then I have to go and figure out whether there's any support for that in the literature. So it can't just be, I've got this brilliant idea and no one's ever thought of it before, because of course someone's thought of it before. You have to then provide a foundation for why that idea makes sense. It comes in the choice of topics, what intuition guides you to a specific topic. It comes in the choice of people to work with, collaborators and partners, or whether you work on your own. It comes in the choice of whether, if you're doing field work, whether you're working with people or on people. In my sense, is better to work with people, but that makes your research more difficult and more less likely to be published in the top tier journals, I suppose. So connecting is, yes, about connecting people because they might have something in common, but it's really a sudden flash of insight, and it's definitely something that is a spiritual process. And we don't know, that's a creative thing. We don't know where those ideas come from. We don't know how that process happens. I don't think anyone does. And then, what we've got the data, we have to make sense of it. So the sense-making process is really our work in publishing our work, our research, our scholarship. Putting it out there, not just in maybe academic form, but perhaps increasingly these days in other forms like blogs, or maybe even on social media, or in the kind of video that Jyoti showed us, where we can get our ideas out in very different ways than traditional. Requires us to have a whole set of skills that we may or may not. I don't have all those skills, but some people do. But what we do as academics is we look at situations and we abstract from one level to the next level of analysis to gain insights about what's in common about those things. And that it's related to this sort of gift that comes from spirit, as Ornita told us. It's not something that we necessarily control, but we can prepare ourselves to receive it in so many different ways, and I think we need to. I like to think of it as a gift from the universe, because I'm not I don't speak in terms of God, but or spirit in quite the way some others do, but it's a gift that comes, and it comes on the basis of preparation, but it sometimes comes unasked. So research, writing, scholarship is all about making sense of what we see, observe, study, research, find insights about, analyze, and connect. It's about taking that creative leap that's offered to you as a gift, and having those aha moments that seem so completely obvious in hindsight, but you couldn't have got there without all the work that went before. But that do come as that gift from the universe. So, and writing that down in a way that's accessible to others, that's really important as far as I'm concerned, is without a lot of jargon, without ways of sort of obfuscating what we're doing. That's really important. So all of this stuff is what in my title I call definitively normal. It's infused with values, prescriptive ideas, ways that we ought to be in the world. I can't help it. That's the healing agenda that keeps coming to me time and time again. I take the ideas that I was referring to at the opening, in an initiative that I'm involved with called Bounce Beyond. We're talking about transformative system change, which hasn't happened yet and needs to happen. That change is in the direction of those socially just, equitable, and flourishing socio-ecological contexts that support all of life. But how to do that? That's where prospective theorizing, prospective thinking as Chris calls it, comes in. And that's where the theory is definitively ahead of the practice. In a sense, I can see, and others, I'm almost done, Judy, can see what needs to happen, and somehow we need to be able to articulate that in ways that is not necessarily based on empirical evidence, but on intuition, understanding, and lots of other stuff. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate not only the kind of steps and ways, ways of doing, but how you've really woven in the ways of being, and in terms of real similar to what Ornita has talked about with the term spirit. That you use the term new social imaginaries that caught my imagination, and it's like we're moving into collective territory built upon our individual growth, our individual formation, our individual consciousness involvement, and now interconnecting because there are interconnected wicked problems. So we in our consciousness need to be interconnected, and so appreciate all the work you're doing. So I also really appreciate how everyone kept to their time. I don't know that that's ever happened in a panel before, so I really want to thank you all for doing such a wonderful job at keeping it to the 7 minutes, which allows us now to open it up for questions and comments for about the next 7 minutes or so with our participants. Okay, Jianwan.
Yeah, thank you. So, Arita, I really love your presentation about studying spirit in a different approach. But would you like to speak a little more about how to measure the unmeasurable, the subjective, the transnatural phenomenon?
Sure, I can respond to that. I think the challenge is that we do think that spirit is subjective. I appreciate, I think someone said yesterday, is that if we would be willing to view the real, I hope I got the word right, but that sense of where there are some things that are better known through a collective voice, okay? And I do think we do have a collective voice where when we deal with the spirit, one, it has to be spiritually discerned in that sense, very much like the sciences. We would not study a social phenomena with a scientific method, put it that way, okay? In that sense of where there are some methods that are based on our own, the use of some methods are based on our own limited perspective. And so if we regard something as subjective, often we'll study it as such, okay? Or maybe not even study it and just call it mystical. But there's much evidence that has been given that the spirit can be known, can be observed, can be identified, okay, if we choose to do so. Very much just like the sciences, because in reality is that there are things that only exist because something created them, right? Okay. And often we miss that point and we go to that level where it is our human limitation that causes us not to see what is already there. Does that answer?
Yeah, I'm thinking of dreams. Maybe dreams should be given legitimacy in paper, in our academic writing, because dreams often give us intuition, inspiration.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Or
I
mysterious experience. They should be given legitimacy in academic writing, in research.
Absolutely, because just because we don't know it doesn't mean that it's fully unknown. You know, we need collective knowing in order to better understand some things. Great, thank you.
Thank you so much, Amita.
Thank you. Ramya has her hand up, and then Anil.
My question is for Sandra. How can we train ourselves and PhD scholars in ways of being? Or at least to get better, maybe not not as much as like Sandra, but can we get a little bit ahead on that? Yeah. Are there any tools and techniques, or are there methods which we can practice?
Sure, of course there are, and I think Ian or Judy or Jyoti, many people are practicing them and showing us how to do that. I was Miss Task for many years, very empirically oriented, very aggressive, very ambitious, and I then ran into a couple crises. I'll make this very short, if I can, and ended up working with a shamanic group, but it introduced me to meditation practices, and so sort of accessing something inside yourself, healing what needs to heal in you, and then just sort of I call this process allowing what comes to you to come to you, and then seeing that as an opportunity to move forward. So you have to be open, you have to be aware, you have to be sort of transparent with yourself and honest with yourself. Chris Laszlo talks about many different approaches. It's not one, it's what works for you.
The Quantum Leadership book that Chris wrote is full of practices and suggestions. It's called Quantum Leadership. That Fred Sau, who was a panelist this morning, and Chris Laszlo, who was yesterday, that it has one whole chapter on practices that you can do with students or with clients, individual and collective, and then there's a list of like 110 practices in the back that go across all kinds of different traditions. So it's a really wonderful resource. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anil, and then Jyoti, and then I think we'll need to end.
Well, thank you very much. I'm amazed at all this broad variety of quote-unquote non-traditional approaches. And I'm always wondering about this notion of idea. We always say, where did the idea come from? And the idea, I think, in some ways means leading to a certain well-defined action, or at least directionally. I'm just thinking the other possible ways to get away from this notion of idea, maybe something like impulse. When we talk of meditation from the consciousness, it's just, what you get is impulse. Impulse says this should happen. It could be an actionable thing. It may be a final state, or it may be something. So maybe we should broaden the discussion on the notion of ideas as something that can be tested, but focus on other language such as impulse, and there could be other possible constructs, I think. And Sandra, if you want to address that, because you talked of some of these things.
I think it's, there's nothing to say. You said it. It's a great idea.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I saw that that Isabel Romanowski put a link to a resource workbook for educators. And Isabel has been working in this field, especially around flourishing and providing support materials for faculty and for researchers. So please check out her work. And so we will allow, let's see, okay, we're, Anil, all right, I think we're complete, and I want to thank all the panelists so much. You're all people I admire and have contributed to my think. Oh, I'm sorry, I see Jyoti has her hand up. And then I'll have one last comment. Oh, Jyoti, okay.
Ramya is very modest. I just wanted to add an answer to her question, because about 10 hours before this session, she was in a session where I learned from her and her collaborator, Janani, about body journaling. So in terms of techniques and practices, since all of us are educators in the room, once a day, twice a day, take a minute, let your body move however your day has gone in response to that. And that body journaling, a minute, will be transformative in building your awareness about practices. The practice I have used with some success in my EMBA classroom is to begin every class with a minute of silence and say, set your intention for what you want to learn, arrive fully, let go of the rest of the day. And students really appreciate that. I regularly get told I needed that minute. And that shared silence builds more community than all the other words. So thank you, Judy, for letting me share what I learned from Ramya.
How wonderful. And that is actually an example of what I hoped would come out of this speed dating experience of being quickly exposed to lots of different perspectives on methodologies and ways of being in different methodologies. And I see in the chat, and I haven't followed everything, but I see that certain people are saying, oh, I need to get in touch with you. I need to learn more from you. And that is so much what this community is about. So if you want to date someone or date one of these methodologies that you've heard about today, please reach out to that presenter. I know all of our presenters want to share and want to support you in your work. So please reach out and make those connections, and we'll continue to learn and grow with each other. Thank you all panelists. Thank you so much for your wisdom, and thank you everybody who attended.